Okay, so for all the impatient multitaskers out there, this is a good amp. For those with more patience and an interest to know why I think this is a good amp, stay tuned. Okay, let's start with the setup. This review is about the Willsenton R8 tube amplifier. We are using the source from Quad, a CD player from the 99 series. We have clean power from the PS Audio regenerator. We are using for streaming music the Blue Sound Note I. That one plays into this PS Audio New Wave DA converter. And we're playing with the Lin Ninkas. And over on the side, my own loudspeakers, the Oscillias, and we have the Lin Katan loudspeakers, filmed with a little bit too much backlight. Those are the contestants for today. Let's start. Okay, so what can we see at the front of the Willsenton? Well, starting from left to right, of course, we have the off-on control. You can have some inputs. There's the CD player input. You have two inputs that you can choose for yourself, auxiliaries. You can use this amplifier as a power amp, so there is a pre-amp in connection. And this is something else that I will tell you later about, but this is for the different settings of the power tubes. Here you have the bias checker. You can check the bias on all four of the power amps and you can adjust it for yourself. Triode ultralineair. This is where you switch the two modes that you can use the power tubes in. and over here is your selector for the different inputs. There is a remote with this amplifier, so here's the sensor for that, and then of course there is the volume knob. And again, from left to right you have your CD input right over here, an auxiliary 1 where I have the Bluesound now connected, auxiliary 2 and the preamp inputs. Here are your loudspeaker binding posts, 4 ohms and 8 ohms. And over here you have a tube selector. You can use two kinds of tubes for this amp. Actually 3, but I'll tell you about that later. But there's 2 different kind of tubes, and you switch the selector according to the tubes that you are using. And of course here is your AC power input connected to this nice Oyaide power connector and Oyaide cable. And this is the rear. So here are the 3 loudspeakers that I'm going to use, and let me show you 2 things why this is an interesting setup. First of all, we have a 4 ohm loudspeaker, we have an 8 ohm loudspeaker and a 16 ohm loudspeaker. Another way to categorize these 3 loudspeakers is in sensitivity. So over here we have 85 dB sensitivity, over here we have 90 dB, and over here we have 98 dB. Also, another difference is that the little one, the Katan, is a bass reflex and the Ninka is not. On top of the amp you have the tubes. There are 4 power tubes. Here you can see the KT88 tubes, but you can also use EL34s or 6550 tubes. The smaller tubes are for the preamp stage, the voltage stage and the driver stage. This amp is a little like a Swiss Army knife, and one of the things you can do is a little tube rolling. Step 1, take out the current tubes. And step 2 is put in the new tubes. There's a little notch on the tube and the tube socket to make sure you put it in the right way. So as I just showed you, I have changed the Willsenton KT88 tubes. I took them out of the amp and I replaced them with the EL34s that are now in the amplifier. Now one thing is that these need to be checked on their bias. And over here, is this too close? Yeah. You can check the bias. Right over here you can see bias current V3 and V4. This is valve 3 and valve 4. On the other side we have the same bias current valve 1 and valve 2. So in front of all the tubes you see 1, 2, 3 and 4. So if I switch this little lever over here to number 3, you can check the bias right over here. I let it go now and I put it on, As you can see, it is much too low. Now I'm checking number 4, and also much too low. It should be in middle. So right over here you have the bias adjust holes, and I don't know if you can see, but in there is a little screw. Can you see that? And another one over there, and then of course 2 over there. So what you do, you take a little screw driver. I have one right over here. Let me change hands. And I'm going to change the bias, but I need 2 hands for that. So I'll put down the I put the camera on a tripod. Okay, so I'm trying to get a shot here that will show you everything. So you see the bias over here. Over here is the switch that I'm going to use, and over here are the 2 holes. So let me position this one right over there. So that's one hand. The other hand, because I'm now in hole number 3, I'm checking out this, and when I turn it you'll see the bias meter going up, and I'm not right in front of it, but I'm trying to see if this is straight up, and then you are done. That's actually it. And now you can see the bias is much better. Let me see if I can get it a bit closer. This is number 3, and now on to number 4, because that needs help. Also, I won't bother you with doing all 4 of them, but that is how you change the bias. So after setting up the whole system, I took a few weeks to get to understand this Willsenton amplifier. I listened to a lot of different music on the 3 different loudspeakers, using the quad CD player and my Bluesound streamer as sources. I also used the Willsenton to watch movies, as I played the sound from my Oppo Blu-ray player into the PS Audio DAC and on to the Willsenton tube amp. Now, one of the reasons this review took so long is the following. There are 2 sets of power tubes. Each set can be played in 2 different ways, triode and ultralinear, so that is 4 different settings, and I used 3 loudspeakers. So in total I had to compare 12 different settings. Now this is not a complaint, I love doing this review, but it did take some time to compare these 12 different settings. Now I'm not going to bore you with all 12 settings, but here is what I observed. For $800 you get an amp that is very versatile and therefore should be able to integrate in all kind of different systems. It is very musical, it has a nice boogie factor, and it gives you a lot of detail if the recording has it. The triode setting is sweet in sound and well suited for smaller ensembles like a jazz trio or a singer. For more complex music and things like a big orchestra, I preferred the ultralinear setting. And it is just one click on the remote to switch between these 2 settings. If I look back at my notes, the pattern is triode is more romantic, ultralinear is more businesslike, especially with the KT88s. With the EL34 it was romantic for the triode setting and more control for the ultralinear setting. So in the end the EL34 tube was my favorite over the KT88. It had more control, more detail, it also played romantic and had more authority. It gave me that audiophile feeling. Very good. So what about the 3 loudspeakers? Well, the small Lin was a big surprise. In all 4 settings it played way above the price I paid for it, second hand. I was actually a bit embarrassed that I only used this little loudspeaker as a surround sound player. Bass control could be a little bit better, but if you are on a budget, the Willsenton Lin Catan Combi is very capable. You have to give the Lin a bit of room though.
The big Lin was even better in sound quality. It had more control and the only thing was a little loss of bass control. Now, for a tube amp at this price, this is completely acceptable. But strangely enough, I thought bass control on the small Lin was a little better. Maybe the difference between 4 ohm and 8 ohm. So what about the Auxilia? Well, I thought this would be the perfect match, but I don't know if a 16 ohm loudspeaker is the best match for the Willsenton. It sounded beautiful, don't get me wrong. You could still very easily hear that this is the better loudspeaker of the three. But there was some loss of control over the loudspeaker, and at its worst, it made the treble a little bit more unpleasant. But only when you played it pretty loud. And this was more apparent with the KT88 than the EL34. So is this the perfect amp? No, of course not. There is no such thing. When I got the amp, one of the small tubes gave me some problems and later it happened to one of the other small tubes again. But this is more a problem of tubes than of Willsenton. In fact, Willsenton shipped us a new set of tubes from China right away without any questions and free of charge. And Willsenton has been great in all our communications. Another thing was that bad recordings do sound bad on the Willsenton. Even though it may be romantic, it does not smooth things over. I don't even know if this is a bad thing or a good thing, but if you feed it a good recording, it will reward you. And then there's the remote control. It is very nice to have, but it is very noisy. It is a full metal body, but the rattling of the buttons still makes it feel a little bit cheap. And the steps in volume are too big for me. No fine volume adjustment on this one. And if you are an absolute bass control freak, this is not the amp for you. But this amp is also not trying to be a bass freak. It is trying to be a very musical amp that will adapt to your system and have you tapping your feet as soon as the music starts playing. And then there's one thing I haven't mentioned yet. This amp is also a headphone amp, but unfortunately I was not impressed by that part. I don't know if this part is also amplified by the tubes or that it is a separate amp, but it lacks in transparency. It is nice to have and it also does not sound bad, it's nothing special, and for me, if compared to the sound quality of this amplifier, it is just not in the same league. So, would I change my system for this one? No, I wouldn't, but that is also not a fair comparison. The Willsenton is $800, and if you had to buy my tube amp new today, remember it is 34 years old, if you want to buy it today you have to bring $30,000. But the Willsenton, together with the Lin Catan, the small one, if it would fit the bill, if that is your budget, I wouldn't think twice about it. I like this amp. Okay, so it is late at night and I was listening to this song and I thought, well, let's try my new camera in the dark and my new microphone. Let's see how they do. can understand if you do not like this kind of music, but this sounded really beautiful. Now from the same album I'm going to do the next track, which is a choir. Let's see how that works out. Here we go. It's like being there.